Hey, comrades, so I know it sounds extreme. Italki lied to me, right? A little clickbaity, but it's true. Italki did lie to me. And in this video, I will talk about the result from an Italki French placement test, what it means, why it is wrong, some major errors with the test that lead me to believe it is AI slop, and why it's so fundamentally broken Italki shouldn't even be able to give me the score they give me. So first off, what does the test even say? So apparently I'm a language master, at least in French. I'm practically fluent. My level is C1, and I scored better than 98% of other language learners. And for someone who isn't familiar with the Common European Framework of Reference, aka the CEFR or the CEFR scale, it's whenever you have those letters, so like A1, B1, C1, C2, etc. That's the CEFR. And for someone who isn't familiar with the system, I think the thing that'll jump out to you is probably the 98%, and that might be true. I might have scored in the top 2% of the people who took this quiz. I don't really have a way of knowing, but I do know I could not have gotten a C2. It is simply too high. It is above my French level. And that's really important. The C2 is really the more objective thing. I don't know what the level of the French of the other people who took this test was, but I know what C2 means. And so in the system, in the Common European Framework of Reference, language abilities are broken up into general stages. So there's A1 and A2, and these are the beginning stages. But they can be difficult to reach. We say beginner, but it takes a lot of work to get to beginner. Someone can spend months learning a language rather seriously without getting above A2, and most people who just study a language for a couple of years in class but don't expose themselves to it outside of class can even spend years learning without ever reaching above A2. The next pair are B1 and B2. These are intermediate, so this is when you can use the language extensively outside of a learning environment without much issue. There's a huge difference between B1 and B2, but even at B1 you'd be able to have fairly natural conversations with native speakers, even if you make a lot of mistakes. You won't be able to talk about everything exactly, but you should be able to talk about things that are likely to come up in circumstances you were expecting to encounter. Honestly, because I've been a pretty bad French student, my spoken French is probably a B1, and my reading is probably about a B2. I have a fairly strong accent and I make mistakes, but I can generally communicate most things I would like to. I have a lot of trouble understanding native speakers, especially when they talk among each other or use a lot of slang, but I can navigate a one-on-one interaction without much of a problem. And as long as the person I'm talking to doesn't use too much slang and speaks in an accent I'm familiar with, everything should be fine. I have a fairly large reading vocabulary and a good grasp of the grammar, at least when I have time to think it through, like when I'm writing. So I'm about a B2 in terms of reading comprehension, which honestly means I can read books written for adults, looking up some words here and there, without too much trouble. Some people would say that someone with a B2 in reading, writing, speaking, and listening is fluent in the language, and a B2 certificate is often the requirement to do things like taking college courses in another country where they speak that language, or applying for certain jobs where you would use that language to interact with people. The third pair are the advanced levels, C1 and C2. So C1 is generally accepted to be fluent by pretty much everyone. It's not the same as being a native speaker, of course, but it's a very high level. C2 is often considered kind of unnecessary for most real-world applications, and generally requires a higher understanding of slang and technical jargon than many people would need in a second language realistically. So when I have a B1, maybe on a good day, let's say I have a B2 in French, and I take a test that says I'm C2, that is an astonishing margin of error. Like, imagine if I was like 5'10" and I said I was like 6'5". That's the level of obvious error that we are at. It should be obvious to any reasonable observer who is familiar with the criteria that my French is not a C2. But so what? Like, I just did well on test. Why does it even matter? So this matters for a few reasons. One is that this is an educational platform we're talking about here, and the primary reason that people here will be looking for an assessment will be to look for an adequate teacher and communicate their needs. And so this level assessment just makes Italki a worse tool because it impedes effective understanding and communication of your educational needs. If you think that you're a C2 in French and really you're like a B1, then you are not going to be looking for the right teacher. And of course, if someone is actually looking to see what they need to prepare for a real CEFR certificate, they will be completely misguided. And this is an important thing. You need a real certificate for certain jobs, for certain university applications, maybe certain programs. To apply for visas, you might need like an A2 or B1, and even not a visa, but to apply for citizenship. This is a real thing that affects people on a very real level. And so the other way that this is harmful is really quite simple. They author two versions of their assessment. One is the estimate with 15 questions, and the other is the certificate, which they charge $30 for. The estimate is just 15 questions, and the certificate is 30 questions. And I know that $30 isn't the most money in the world. You know, it's not like the highest amount they could be charging for it. There are evils which are far worse in the world, but the person could spend that $30 on lessons on Italki and improve their target language instead of getting nothing out of it, instead of getting a fake assessment that isn't accurate. If you take an assessment that doesn't actually assess you, you aren't getting anything out of it. So I decided to do another test in a language that I actually am much more comfortable in, Spanish. And, you know, because I am more comfortable in Spanish, you know, if they gave me like a C2 in Spanish, I might think it was a bit high, but I wouldn't be floored, you know, I wouldn't be making this video. But what I found taking the Spanish test was quite frankly shocking. There were several errors with the test, and before I show you those errors, what I want to do, what we're going to do together is we're going to take the English test so that you can follow along more easily. I was just going to show you the Spanish questions that were wrong, but let's do this in English so that you will be able to understand everything even if you don't speak Spanish. And so I haven't done it yet. I haven't done the English test yet, the English examination, so I don't know if there will be errors. Hopefully, there shouldn't be any errors because it's a larger language and presumably the person making the test could speak English. But we will see either way, whether there are errors or not, why the test isn't capable of fully evaluating your abilities. Why a 15 question assessment, even, you know, the extended 30 question assessment, simply doesn't go deep enough to guarantee that you speak a language at a high level. Okay, so what we are going to do, we can see that we're in the language section for Italki. There are the various test levels. We're going to test our English level, see how it goes. And so we're going to do the quick assessment. This is estimated to be just 5 minutes as opposed to the longer 15-minute paid comprehension test. And you can see it's a fill-in-the-blank exercise. This is how they all work. So it's recognizing faces as an important human social. And so I think this is a little more sophisticated than what I saw on the French or Spanish test, where it's a kind of a complicated vocabulary test. Because, you know, an English speaker will know that the next word is going to be social skill. It's what's called a collocation when two words kind of go together. We know when you say social, we're talking about a skill. But, you know, for someone who's learning English, they wouldn't have a way of knowing that it wasn't social knowledge or social talent. Maybe social method would still sound a little weird to them. Next up, our second question. He always blanks his homework before dinner. Actually, I already gave it away. I said he blanks and not he blank because I wanted to conjugate it. So for any native English speaker, obviously this is going to be fairly easy. This is a basic grammar question. What this is designed to test is if we know that we say he always does or he always do. And so in standard General American and RP English, we always say he always does. I think there are some accents where they say he always do, but this is generally seen as not normative, as not the standard language. And I think this is probably, on a grammatical level, probably testing somewhere in A1 or A2. So this is testing, can you use the present tense with a very common, albeit slightly irregular. And yeah, as irregular verbs do, I don't think, you know, changing to does is super weird. We're just adding an E. We generally add an S on anyways when we have a third person word. Next up, we have a very similar question. We have, I buy the tickets on Friday. And so it's just, hey, do you know how conjugation works in English? So this would be, you know, if it were I am, we'd know the next word would be buying. Actually, this is a funny one, I realized, because I said I buy the tickets on Friday. because that's a perfectly correct sentence. But we can see this is probably the answer they want. So as like a native English speaker, I found a correct answer, and that was the first one I decided was right. But I bought the tickets on Friday is also correct. It's probably the one that we're going with. Then they have I bide. Unless you want to talk like a 3-year-old, that's the incorrect one. This is another kind of like A2-ish test. We're checking, can you use an irregular verb in the past tense. And so I would say I buy the tickets on Friday is a correct sentence, and I bought the tickets on Friday is also a correct sentence. But let's go with I bought. So you can already see how the test is breaking apart a little bit. And I think this is part of why this kind of thing is part of why I do think the person who's designing the test either, didn't know how to do it that well, or they didn't care, or they just slopped it together with AI. So next one is when Mary was little, she blank spent hours every day playing with her lovely dolls. Actually, this question was in the Spanish test. It was one of the weird ones. So I wonder if what happened is they designed the test for English and just translated it into Spanish, which is going to be a very bad way of designing a test because the questions, the things you want to test in one language aren't necessarily the same things you want to test in another language. And I don't know if there's any scale behind this. The questions are weighted more than others. So if like one question is, a particularly difficult one, if that gives you more points or something, I don't know how that works, but obviously just translating the sentence would completely mess this up. And so we can tell it wasn't was she was spend is not grammatical English. She would spend hours. That is correct. She used spend. This is almost correct. So she used to spend would um would be correct. And actually, she may spend. Almost sounds like she may spend, but I think because it's the past tense, it would have been like she may have spent hours. We'd want it to be that way. So she would spend hours playing with her dolls every day. The government needs to take action to respond to the crisis. So I think this is probably like somewhere in the B area, maybe like a B1 question because it's a little complicated, right? So it's you just have to know a lot of vocabulary to be able to get this kind of a question, right? And we want, of course, the word address. The government needs to take action to address the crisis. This might even be like a B2 level question. Obviously, speak would be incorrect. Hopefully, like without a preposition, that should be obviously incorrect for anyone like above an A2. Respond is almost correct because it would be respond to. And I think despite is there just because they needed another word. I can't think of why anyone would be learning English and think, the government needs to take action to despite the crisis. It almost sounds like to spite the crisis, which would mean something else, but it's to address the crisis. Blank we did when we were together was argue. So I'm guessing that's all we did when we were together. Let's see what the options are. So if we did when we were together was argue, doesn't make any sense. That we did when we were together was argue, doesn't make any sense. All we did together when we all we did when all we did when we were together was argue. That's correct. Which we did when we were together was argue. It's all. This is another just like, do you have a basic understanding of how English sentences work? Can you find the right one of these rather basic words? I would say this might be like an A2 level question, maybe, like an A1. This is more advanced one. This is more specific vocabulary you might not, learn in like as one of the first words you learn English. The professor's unusual theories are sure to come under. And when I saw this blank, I wanted fire, come under fire from many of his rivals, but reading through our options, fire is not an option, but it's just about collocations, what sounds natural. Come under doubt makes as much logical sense as come under attack, but we say come under attack. We don't say come under doubt. Come under question, come under criticism. We could imagine a universe where that was just completely normal English, but any native English speaker is just going to gravitate towards come under attack. So this is probably one of the more complicated questions on this test. His actions were completely blank with the values of the organization. So they were probably out of line or in line with the values of the organization. We have incorrect with, doesn't quite make sense, incoherent with. doesn't quite make sense. Incompatible. This sounds right. His values were incompatible with the value. His actions were incompatible with the values of the organization. We also have inconsistent, and I think inconsistent is also a grammatically correct, perfectly normal sentence. I would say, someone said to me his actions were completely inconsistent with the values of the organization. I would think that that was a reasonable sentence. I wouldn't spot that as wrong, but I suspect they want the word to be incompatible. This is another poorly designed question because we're choosing between two correct answers here when we're only allowed to choose one answer. So maybe I don't know how this works underneath the hood. Maybe they do accept it as correct if you choose either one of the correct answers. But that makes the test less reliable overall. I think if they were going to do that, they would have a system where we could select all of the correct answers. And so if they had multiple correct answers, we'd have to choose all of the correct ones, and then if we thought only one answer was correct, we'd have to decide, oh, I think the other answer is incorrect. I think that would be a better test system. But let's go with incompatible. Susan and Tommy have agreed to come to our party. Blink has made Mary excited. So we have four options. We have wall, doesn't make any sense. Like, Susan and Tommy have agreed to come to our party. Wall has made, while has made Mary excited. Like, while indicates that something's happening during another action. What would trip up a lot of Romance speakers, I think, because you'd use a word that would sound like what, in Spanish or Italian, you just get. So, we have Susan and Tommy have agreed to come to our party, which has made Mary excited, or that has made Mary excited. And honestly, they both sound kind of weird to me. They both sound like a little off. Like, I want to say, Susie and Tommy have agreed to come to our party, which has made Mary excited. Um, because honestly, like, to me, that sounds like the party has made Mary excited, not like Susan and Tommy. We're gonna go with which. I don't like this question because I don't think like a native speaker would necessarily automatically know the difference between whether you use which or that here, or even if there is like some formal rule of English that tells you which one to use here. But which sounds better to me. So the issue is far from simple. In fact, it's incredibly, and so we know we're looking for the antonym of simple here. We're looking for something that means complicated. We've composited, kind of sense of complicated. Convoluted, which is just a synonym of complicated. Collated, that's kind of a funny one to put here. And convolute, which is just the verb form of convoluted. So we want convoluted. And in terms of what we're testing here, this is another. It's fairly advanced vocabulary. I wouldn't, expect, maybe someone who's learning English to automatically just like know this just because they've been studying for a while. I could see this being, maybe like a B2 level test. The documentary provided a something critique of modern consumer culture. I suspect I haven't looked at the options yet, but we're just going to look into a word that's going to be a common collocation of critique. So we have staggering, a staggering critique. One could say that scathing. People do say scathing critique of modern consumer culture. Stammering, not quite right. Like, that would be a correct sentence provided a stammering critique of modern consumer culture. It's just, unless they were, like stammering their words, nobody would say that. And scratching. I think they put in scratching because it sounds like scathing, and scathing is probably the correct answer here because it's what people say. Scathing critique, it's another collocation. And I think these kind of collocation questions are interesting for this test because I think they really are kind of the hardest questions that we will see for learners. I think, you really have to expose yourself to the language a lot, scathing critique. This might be like a C1 question. I'm not sure, but it definitely does seem like the hardest thing we've seen in terms of testing vocabulary. He delivered his speech with such, I want it to be elegance. I don't know if that's going to be an option, that even his critics were impressed. We have elaboration. which is a grammatically correct sentence. You know, he delivered his speech with such elaboration. Eloquence, which is what I wanted just automatically. Elevation sounds a little weird. Like we're using weird metaphorical usage of elevation that I don't think people have. Oh no, we have eloquence and elegance. Yeah. So I'm guessing it's ele- elegance. Eloquence. I can speak English. Apparently, I cannot pass this test. So we can say like he gave a speech with elegance, that would be correct, but eloquence is obviously the one people use more when they are talking about how people talk. So we're picking the matching word, and so we have this image, and I find this a little annoying, right? Because we have read, write, book, letter. It's very basic vocabulary, so you know this is once again we're in like a C1, not a C1, like an A1 level here. But I don't know. I feel like if you're going to do this kind of a thing, the words should at the very least be rather different, right? You know, like this could be related to read, even though I'm assuming it's book, and that doesn't look like a letter to me. You know, I don't know how you represent like write with a you know like a cartoon like this, but I find this kind of question annoying. Okay, so this is another one. We're just picking a matching word and it's table because we don't have any chairs. It's not a couch. There's no lamp. This is another one. This doesn't quite look like the right color for an orange to me, but I'm assuming this is an orange. It's not a pear because of the cross sections. It's not an apple. Has to either be a lemon or orange. Looks more orange than yellow to me. This would be annoying for someone who's like colorblind, I suspect. We're gonna see how we did. Okay, so it gave us our C2, so I didn't get any of the questions wrong, apparently. So what we can see from the Italki test is that it's simply not adequate to test at a high level. There were a bunch of different questions of various levels, so there were a few kind of A1, A2 questions, maybe a few B questions, maybe one or two questions you could squint at and look at and say, oh, that was kind of a C1 question, especially with the kind of collocations that I think take a lot of time and exposure to the language to fully understand. But the grammatical questions weren't really that in depth. They really just kind of were stuck at conjugations, like basic present tense, past tense. It wouldn't even have some of the more exotic tenses, you know, like the past perfect, like I didn't eat at the party because I had already eaten. You know, what would you do if you were here? You know, those sentences can be complicated. All of the questions were pretty simple in format. They were all a single sentence with a fill in the blank option. So we didn't have any production tests, so we didn't see how people could speak, their pronunciation, if they could form a sentence on the fly. We didn't have if they were able to write, if they were able to spell, if they were able to think through a sentence at a kind of a sentence in paragraph level, which is necessary for a C2. It's like a C2 exam is really hard. It's like taking the SATs in another language, like a college entrance exam in another language. And like you don't have to do as well as some people might want to do on the SATs, but it's still the same level of difficulty where you have to read long difficult passages and understand them, not fill in blanks on specific sentences. There's also no oral comprehension test, so sometimes people will be really good at writing and reading, but when other people are talking, it kind of goes in one ear and out the other. They might have trouble with specific accents. All of that kind of thing is a thing you'd want to test for at a legitimate like C2 level test. Taking the English test now is kind of put the Spanish test, at least, you know, the one I understood better, you know. I do speak Spanish much better than I do speak French. So I had a better grasp on the Spanish test to begin with. But now looking back on it, I can see what happened was is probably they had questions, they had a test in English that someone didn't care a lot about. They didn't make it super careful. It wasn't the best test. It didn't have all the love in the world. And I think they just did an AI translation or some kind of automatic translation of that test into Spanish. And I don't think it works. And so let's take a look at some of the questions. So we have this first one. Cuando María era pequeña, pasaba horas cada día jugando con sus preciosas muñecas. So this was translated from the English question. When Mary was little, she used to pass hours every day playing with her dolls. And it's broken in Spanish. It does not work. The reason it doesn't work in Spanish is because if you take out that blank and just leave pasaba, it's a completely grammatically correct sentence in Spanish, which means the question is broken. The test is failing us at this point. But if we give it a little bit of mercy, if we give it our compassion, we give it the benefit of the doubt, and we say pasaba is probably written incorrectly, and they meant pasar, so it's a different conjugation. It's like the difference between used to pass, and to pass. If we change it to pass, we can put in solia, which means used to, as in to do something habitually, or podía, she was capable of, which is really annoying because now we're giving the question itself, the incorrectly written question, the benefit of the doubt, and we still have two questions. But what I think happened is this other question, this other answer, the second one, usaba, is supposed to be the correct one, I think, according to the test. Because in English, we say she used to pass, and that's what it was in English. That was the correct answer. Now, this isn't correct in Spanish because we can't use used to mean to do habitually. It just means that she used something. But so it's an incorrect answer. But a word-for-word translation of the English sentence would give us this translation of the question into Spanish, and it doesn't work. Next up, we have hace demasiado frío afuera, deberías usar una chaqueta. It's like it's too cold outside, or it's very cold outside. You should wear, better yet, you should wear a jacket. And so this is another one. It's already correct without the blank. We can put in debes and puedes. So you could replace deberías with debes and puedes with the first two options, and not a fill in the blank, and it would be a correct sentence, but you can't add them together. You could also just repeat deberías, but because deberías is another answer here, and that's the one I think I chose when I was trying to do this test, just trying to figure it out. But the sentence is broken, the question doesn't work. You have to interpret not just the question, but that they got it wrong, and you have to guess how they got it wrong, and guess how they got it wrong to maybe answer the question correctly, which is really annoying from a product you'd hope to be professionally made. Finally, that last answer for it is just incorrect, so at least one of the answers can't be an answer. And we have another one, and I was looking through this, and I realized this is another one that was translated directly from the English question. And so it's blank los boletos el viernes, and so it means we're assuming we have and then because of the answers we know some conjugation of buy the tickets on Friday. And so we had this in English. This was one of the questions I didn't like in English, because I think you can say I buy the tickets on Friday or I bought the tickets on Friday, and those are both correct sentences even if they mean something different. But here in the little translation, it's really weird because we have four options. With compré, mal escrito. That means poorly written. In parentheses, it's like compré, I bought, poorly written. So we already know that's not the correct answer, by the way, just because it's telling us it's written wrong. With compró, which means I buy. And so we can probably guess it's not the correct answer because it's not the same as compré. We want compré, but written better. Next, we have compré. It's spelled the same way as the first compré, the first I bought, but the first letter is capitalized. And you'll notice the blank is on the first word of the sentence, and we capitalize the first word of the sentence. And so we're just going to pick the capitalized one. We don't even have to think of it. Comprando would mean buying the tickets on Friday. It's not a full sentence. So we can look at this, and this is the one that felt the most AI generated to me. We can just look at this. We can look at the capitalization and figure it out without knowing anything about the language, without knowing anything about Spanish tense structure or anything, and just choose it because the C is big, and we do that on the first word of a sentence. Like, that was really annoying to me. And honestly, I'm even more annoyed now knowing that they probably just did an AI slop translation of mediocre at best English test. And so I'm pretty frustrated. Maybe you do not share my frustration. Maybe you think I'm overreacting, but there is something I want to make clear. I don't have a problem with Italki. I think Italki is a wonderful service, and if you're looking at getting lessons in a language, I highly recommend it. It's great. But I think this assessment is a cheap money grab that takes away from what truly works with Italki. the tutors and the wonderful lessons that many of them give. Italki does not produce great content that I want to use. Italki connects me to people who create the content, who are the teachers, who put in the effort to make something. Italki is kind of a marketplace. And it's a wonderful marketplace. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with the system to organize people together so that I can find a teacher who can help me. I think that's a wonderful, great service. But I think that ultimately this assessment takes away from Italki. It takes away from the value of Italki as a whole, and it makes me respect the brand a little bit less. I think if Italki wants to keep the assessment, they have to seriously revamp it. They have to make it so it can test for a higher level. They have to design it for each language individually, or they have to be clear on what it is. They have to let it say, they can only assess you up to a certain point, and say like, oh, you're, maybe if it said like, oh, you're at least a B1, we can't really tell you any better. And I think that would take a lot of effort. I think that would take a lot of work. Like, there are a lot of organizations that put a lot of effort into the language assessments, into the language testing, and that's not what Italki does. And I don't know if that's what Italki has to do. But if Italki wants to keep this assessment, they want it to not be a bad product, if they want it to be to meet the standards that I would hold Italki to based on the rest of my Italki experience, that's what they have to do. Now, I'm sorry if you think I'm overreacting. I think this is legitimately frustrating. But gotta go for a walk pretty soon. Exercise, be healthy. So good night, good day, and good potato. And if you also frustrated with me, drop me a like. That didn't make a sound. I don't know if the microphone picked that up, but that made a sound.